Thank you for coming on this beautiful December evening, Medford, the legendary Medford, Massachusetts. My name is John Kane. I am the author of The Last Seat in the House, The Story of Hanley Sound. I'd like to also introduce the subject of my book, pioneer sound engineer, Mr. Bill Hanley, who's sitting here. Please give him a round of applause. Bring it back home, Medford, Mass. I'd like to especially thank Library Director Barbara Kerr and her staff here at this wonderful facility. I mean, it took me 20 minutes to figure out how to turn on a light, and another 20, 30 to figure this out. So I'm glad I got here 4 hours earlier. I should be a stand-up comedian. Anyway, thank you for attending, and a little background on me. I'll try to keep this evening flowing nice and steady, sort of summarize my work here. I'm a college professor, been working and teaching for about 15 years now in the field of media, communications, and visual art. We're here now for a very special reason. Sort of the pandemic, it's ironic. I work on a book for 10 years and then a month before the book arrives, we have a pandemic. First off, what is a pandemic? But I know I have to buy lots of toilet paper, so I can't focus on my book anymore. Anyway, it was sort of horrific, not to make a joke of it. I lost some friends during that time, but the book got put aside as my point. So it had always been my wish to bring the book tour here to the new library. That's why this evening is very special. It's a local thing, and I'm glad you guys made it out. Anyway, I grew up in Somerville, just over the Mystic. Bill still calls it Slummerville, even though there's $2 million homes there. I don't know, is it still Slummerville? I can't afford to live in Slummerville anymore, can you? Anyway, Bill, of course, Medford. So for myself, this story has always had a cultural connection. Some of the places that Bill visited and went to and reminisced about, I recalled, even though I was much younger than Bill. So this story is really special, and it's something that it'll always hold dear to my heart. Anyway, quickly, a lot of people ask me, how did you meet Bill Hanley? It's really funny. So, and I'll keep it quick. I was in a band called the Mully Grubs. We were a folk band, and I was set to play Yasgur's Farm. Yasgur's Farm is the homestead of Max Yasgur of Woodstock. And I lost my job. It was the Great Recession. And anyway, long story short, I decided to go back to school. So I got a doctoral degree in leadership studies with a focus on innovative leadership and disruptive technology. When it came time to focus on research, I had no idea what to do. But I needed to find a story or something I could hang my hat on and work on. So mutual friends, Gerald Abramson, who owns Max Yasgur's Farm, she said, "Oh, you should talk to Bill Hanley. He's sort of got a background in music, and one thing led to another, and I met Bill, and here I am today." That was 10 years ago, which is pretty amazing. So it feels, sort of life around, and you make all these connections and the reasons why things happen. So I truly feel like this was all meant to be. So it feels really, really good. And to be here where Hanley shop, which is just, 2 miles down Salem Street in Haynes Square, which is 1 mile, excuse me, is pretty incredible. Because in my view, it's probably one of the most important and or significant places on the East Coast that has to do with popular music culture. I mean, his impact, based on Hanley's innovations and his crew, and of course, Brother Terry, who's not here tonight, is quite a legacy. And, we have a plaque down there noting that. So if you get yourself a cup of coffee, because it is now a Dunkin' Donuts, you can stand there and look at the plaque and, do a little reminiscing yourself. So it's amazing to be here and then have that there, where if you think about it, the speakers and the sound systems, there's so many huge milestone festivals and concerts came out of that Dunkin' Donuts, which of course wasn't a Dunkin' Donuts, it was a proper sound shop. So anyway, what I have planned for tonight is, hopefully you think it's pretty cool. I'm going to read a little bit of Bill's career from my book, little quips, little pieces. We're going to look at a slideshow, so you'll have to bear with me. I have to toggle between my laptop and here, so if I screw up, just I'm giving you a heads up, that might happen. And then we'll read a little bit of that, and then we'll watch about 30 minutes of a documentary I have, and then we'll have a Q&A, and maybe a photo op, and if you're interested in the book, they are signed already. So let me get into a bit of a summary here. In The Last Seat in the House, the story of Hanley Sound, published with the University Press of Mississippi, I examine how sound engineer, pioneer Bill Hanley's contributions in outdoor live sound helped create an entire music production industry. Through an extensive 10-year interview and archival process, I uncovered how Bill Hanley and his company, Hanley Sound, impacted a developing festival and concert marketplace. Born in 1937 in Medford, Mass., Parnelli Award winner Bill Hanley was the oldest of 5 children. By the age of 6, his father gave him his first crystal set, followed by a 1-tube radio, then a 6-tube radio, setting off an interest in electronics. During Bill Hanley's time in vocational school, he became unimpressed with the state of public address-driven technology used for the emerging live music scene. By 1955, he graduated from school and went to work for Laboratory for Electronics and the Addison Cole Corporation, where he moved through various departments, working with circuit boards and radar components. This was the dark ages of professional sound, and Hanley would often need to convince promoters and musicians that quality sound was important. In 1957, Hanley chased down Newport Jazz Festival promoter George Wein, establishing a long, successful career as Newport Folk and Jazz Festival's contracted sound company. By the early 1960s, his company Hanley Sound was fully established at 430 Salem Street, 1 mile down the road, in Haynes Square, Medford, Mass. A proud moment for Hanley's family and community was when he and his younger brother, Terry Hanley, handled the sound for the inauguration of President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. That same year, he opened an office in New York City, providing sound for venues like the Cafe A-Go-Go and the Bitter End. Eventually, the college circuit broke wide open and a need for concert touring sound reinforcement emerged. In 1966, a job for the local Boston band, Barry and the Remains, allowed Hanley the opportunity to support the group on their accompanying tour with the Beatles. Soon, he would find himself behind the mixing console for the eastern portion of the historic and final tour. For these shows, Hanley doubled the sound and power typically used with an impressive, for the time, 600-watt amplification system. As you can imagine, this sound system was pulverized by the crushing power of over 43,000 screaming fans. By 1968, Hanley and his talented crew was brought in to do the sound for Bill Graham's Fillmore East in New York City. By now, his reputation for quality sound was mammoth, leading him to provide sound reinforcement for some of the largest pop and rock festivals in American history. However, nothing could match the culminating performance in sound, the pivotal gig of a live event industry, the Woodstock Music and Art Fair of 1969. Thereafter, Hanley would forever be known as the father of festival sound. Moving into the next decade, Hanley's social conscience led him to work on several large-scale anti-Vietnam War protest rallies, even sending his entire Woodstock sound system to South Africa to help fight the anti-apartheid movement. The post-Woodstock anti-mass gathering initiatives in America, conservative America at the time, set the sound company's projections back. Unprepared for what was to come, his company felt the shortcomings of a changing era of technology and live performance. The 1970s also brought a great transformation to the industry, where newer sound companies surfaced. From the 1970s on, Hanley would continue to be called on for more sound work, eventually turning his attention to staging. A true pioneer, Bill Hanley's contributions to live concert sound reinforcement can be felt to this day. It's quite an impressive story. I often find that I have to educate a lot of people on what sound is. You know, it's something like, what is it? You know, how do we comprehend it? How do we know what's good and what's bad? I mean, I've been to a lot of concerts. I have thousands of ticket stubs. And up until this point in my life, concert going career, I never even gave it a thought. You know, I never thought, well, well, that sounded poor, or that sounded great. I guess I didn't care, or I just wasn't knowledgeable or educated on the subject enough. But this has been a research project for me for a long time, and I am very much in tune with the quality and has a lot to do with Bill correcting me and helping me realize what good, intelligible, high-fidelity sound is, and it really makes a difference. So, and Bill is known for that. So we have a picture here, and I'm going to read a little bit from my book this is Haynes Square around the 1920s, courtesy of Major Tom Convery. Anybody remember Tom Convery? Yeah, what an amazing man and a true Medford historian. I mean, before he passed, he really schooled me on the history of Medford, which was essential to gain an idea of what it was like for Bill to grow up in Medford, and for anybody to grow up in Medford. And it was not unlike what it was like growing up in Somerville, in many ways. So I'll read you a little bit from the book here. I gotta make sure I'm on target with this. I have it all mapped out. Bear with me, please. Settled in 1630, Medford, or as Hanley and other blue-collar locals refer to it, Metha, is around 5 miles northwest of Boston. It has a population of around 60,000 and occupies about 8 square miles. William Francis Hanley Jr. came into this world born on March 4th, 1937 at the Lawrence Memorial Hospital in Medford, Massachusetts. This small city was where Hanley, his family, and the Hanley sound business lived for decades. It's a diverse, strong, and proud community. As one historian claims, it is several neighborhoods of variable terrain connected by the Mystic River. In fact, Medford is a great deal like the river that flows through its heart. People of different social and economic levels created a community in Medford. Hanley often reflects on the many Irish and Italian families that lived near his childhood home at 56 Farragut Avenue. The city of Medford has boasted many innovators, entrepreneurs, and creative minds. For example, James W. Tufts invented the concept of the drugstore, soda parlor, here during the mid to late 1800s. Medford also is home to Tufts University, where Boston's first radio station, AMRAD, was located. Here, the first female broadcast announcer, Eunice Randall, worked during the 1920s. Inspired by the winter sleigh races from Medford to the adjoining town of Malden, local resident James Pierpoint penned the holiday song One Horse Open Sleigh, more commonly known as Jingle Bells. Other Medford idiosyncrasies include C.E. Twombly, owner of the magazine Pigeon News, established in 1895, who introduced Medford to the specialized world of pigeon fanciers. Enthusiasts dedicated to the breeding, exhibiting, and racing of fine homers, tumblers, and varieties. Amelia Earhart lived in Medford with her sister Muriel Earhart Morrissey for a short time during the early 1920s. It is said that she indulged in flying and wrote aviation articles in Boston magazines. Fanny Farmer, famously who authored the Modern Cookbook, and New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg were residents of Medford as well. Haynes Square, formerly known as Stevens Square, was named after the city's longest-serving mayor, Benjamin Franklin Haynes. 1915 to 22 is less than a mile from Hanley's childhood home at Farragut Avenue. The Haynes Square of his youth was a bustling downtown shopping location for residents who lived close by. Hardware and department stores, insurance agencies, pharmacies, grocery and butcher shops, and a local theater were all active during Hanley's youth. A family-style restaurant called Mueller's, which fed the locals of this bustling Medford village, served as a meeting place for the diverse community. According to many, this was a regular hangout for cops, criminals, families, and much later, an overworked and hungry Hanley sound crew. Hanley's grandmother lived nearby at 409 Salem Street, often venturing into the square for errands. Hanley remembers these youthful encounters with delight. Streetcars, street vendors, and Kennedy butter and egg. It was a great place to grow up, says Hanley. The death of Hanley's grandfather, Patrick J. Hanley, in a tragic trolley accident on Sunday, March 30th, 1924, had a great impact on his family. In that same accident, Hanley's Uncle John lost his leg. The casualty occurred just minutes from Haynes Square on Salem Street when a trolley struck both individuals while they were stepping up onto a sidewalk. The two were on their way to Catholic Mass. Upon hearing of the accident, Bill's father, William F. Hanley, rushed to the scene, recognized his brother's shoes, and then ran home to tell his mother about the horrific accident. Hanley's grandfather was only 44 years old at the time. As a result, the family won a $40,000 lawsuit from the Boston Elevated Street Railway Company, an enormous amount of money for the time that equates to around $600,000 today. Hanley's grandfather was an instructor for the Boston Elevated Street Railway Company for over 18 years and was highly respected in his community. Many who attended his funeral were shaken by the loss. A 1924 Boston Globe article states, "The presence of a large concourse of sorrowing men was evident during his funeral." Mr. Hanley's obituary illustrates the impact it had on his peers. A delegation of about 100 elevated carmen representing the Salem Street car barns and other barns of Division 4 and the instructors department of the elevated at Bartlett Street Station, Roxbury, marched from the house at 409 Salem Street ahead of the funeral cortege as an escort to the church. The flag on the Salem Street car barn flagpole was placed at half-staff. Hanley recalls the impact this accident had on his father. Overnight, he went from a carefree kid to the head of the household. My father was the oldest of 5, 4 brothers and a sister. When he lost his father in that trolley accident, it put a lot of pressure on him to take the reins of the family. He then became the father figure for his brothers and sisters. And I think this is very poignant because this does sort of set how things are happening in Bill's life moving forward as a young man, and of course developing an interest into sound. Farragut Avenue, much like any avenue in these urban areas, tree-lined street with reasonably sized 2-family dwellings just off of Haynes Square, a modest 2-story house, stained dark green. Space was tight but livable for a large family. Bill shared a room with his younger brother Terry, while across the hall his 3 sisters, Barbara, Patricia, and Susan, were settled in their respective rooms. According to Hanley's 3 sisters, the house was always a busy place with lots of people coming and going, a bit like Grand Central Station as they remember it. According to Hanley's sister Susan, Bill would be in and out and would often bring people home. Other people brought stray dogs home. Billy brought everybody home for dinner. Although Hanley's father would be strict, Bill's upbringing in this blue-collar Irish Catholic family overall was a pleasant one. I'm going to roll on here with some additional photos. There we go. So this is Haynes Square in the 80s. There's Bill at around 2 years old. I'm going to grab a drink of water. Bill, you said 2 years old?
Something like that.
Yeah. As far as Bill Hanley can remember, he had been interested in sound. Many of his early experiences were fixing radios and televisions between the ages of 7 and 10 in the basement of his Medford home. In a 1964 Boston Globe article, Audio Enthusiast Lives for Sounds, Hanley emphatically professes, "I've had a mad desire to study electronics since I was in the 3rd grade." The basement Hanley often took over was his father's workshop, affixed with peanut butter jars screwed to the ceiling as an efficient and frugal way to store his spare nuts and bolts. Although frustrated, Mr. Hanley tolerated his son invading his work area. It was in the basement that Hanley first learned how to build speakers, radios, and televisions. It was the laboratory of his youth. His sister Patricia often listened through the heating grates to the goings-on in the basement while her brother was hanging out with friends, Tom Hocko and Phil Evans. Quote, "My father didn't want the girls and boys together, so we had to stay upstairs. If we were quiet enough, they couldn't hear or see us. We thought it was really cool that we could listen to everything that was going on," and those people were saying. If Hanley was not at home in Medford, he was at his other grandmother's house located at 840 Broadway in Chelsea, Massachusetts. According to Bill, he often drove his sweet grandmother crazy with his addiction to Joe Hayden's 1913 comedy monologue, Cohen, on the telephone. According to Hanley, "I used to play it over and over on her wind-up Victrola." Sister Patricia recalls that her brother's interests were growing at such a rapid rate, even at a young age. Quote, "I remember being quite impressed by my brother's first crystal radio set he built out of a Quaker Oats box at around age 6 or 7. Upon later reflection, she realized how truly special a child he was. By the mid-1940s, Hanley often lay in his bed in the dark of his childhood room, listening to WEEI, a local AM radio station, through his self-built radio, attentively immersed in the mystery shows like The Shadow, The Green Hornet, and the Lux Radio Theater. Quote, the set had one earphone, which was tucked under my pillowcase, so when my mother and father came in and checked on me, they couldn't tell if I was listening to the radio or not. They always thought I was asleep. That's Hanley. And here's a cool ad of one of these crystal radio sets here. And there's Bill at the Boston Garden, probably late, it's like 18, 19, 20, early 20s. Continuing his tradition of building electronics from scratch, the crystal set transformed the boy at the time when televisions were appearing in homes across America. So radio was really big in Bill's youth. Let me roll some more photos. And the Boston Garden was famous for having poor sound, by the way. And this is the Ballaroo. How many skated at the Ballaroo here? Ballaroo I even skated at the Ballaroo in the late 70s and 80s. But Bill learned his love of dance and love of dance through roller skating, his love of roller skating, and would roller dance here. And here's Bill and brother Terry, sometime in the 50s, setting up these Rebel speakers. This is one of the earliest photos I think I've ever seen with regard to sound technology of this measure. Speakers being built, custom speakers in this way. And notice the scaffolding and the raw materials being used. There's Bill on the Charles. This was a this was a inflatable tent structure that was built for sort of proper theater exhibitions. Actors, theater-trained actors.
Gilbert and Sullivan Show.
Gilbert and Sullivan Show, correct. They were having trouble with their acoustics there, and Bill was sent out. This is probably one of the first jobs I think Bill had ever done. I'm going to pull up this next one because I want to share this story with you all. I was hoping for a lavalier mic, but it's not charged, so I have to put the microphone down. Bear with me.
That's us hoisting up by hand. And frame speech on the big switch. Yep.
That's it, folks.
It's almost done. George Wein was producing concerts at the Rose Garden off to the left, looking down at the ocean.
Yeah, so this is Castle Hill, right, Bill?
Right.
Right. Page 51. I'm on the wrong page.
That was lifting them up the hard way, block and tackle.
So you all know, I'm toggling through a PDF here with my books. There we go. In 1961, the fate of the Newport Jazz Festival was uncertain. there was a riot that had occurred the year before. Imagine that, a riot at a jazz festival, boy. The riot that occurred the year before, and it was really a riot. The riot that occurred the year before had left the festival in debt over $110,000. So the documentary I'm going to show you fills in all of these sort of in-betweens, and we'll learn how Bill gets to Newport. But Newport, for Bill, who had basically was there for almost 10 years, this is sort of his first legitimate sound contract, steady. I mean, these Newport festivals were legendary, folk and jazz. So Bill had already been there probably a year or 2 years, so this is 1961. And to continue on, in 1961, the fate of the Newport Jazz Festival was uncertain. A riot had occurred a year before that had left the festival in debt. Unable to secure a license from the Newport City Council and no backers for its 8th season, George Wein and the Newport Festival president and co-founder Louis Lorillard focused their efforts on the summer concert program at the Castle Hill Mansion in Ipswich, Massachusetts. Beautiful estate area there. Hopefully most of you have seen it before. Wein was optimistic since annual music events had been held there already. In a May 6, 1961 Billboard magazine article, Wein states, "We are determined that Castle Hill should become America's summer center for the performing arts. We intend to make it a showcase for the greatest talents in classical music and drama, as well as attracting the great names of jazz, folk, and gospel music." In the summer of '61, Wein produced a series of folk, jazz, and classical and pop concerts on the rolling lawn at Castle Hill. And this is at the bottom of that lawn here where Bill and his crew are. And this, of course, required Hanley Sound's assistance in sound. The 20th century country Versailles Crane Estate overlooked a salt marsh bordering Ipswich Bay. The location provided a picturesque venue for concert attendees, replete with beautiful gardens and views of sand dunes. The garden area of the venue could seat 1,700, while the amphitheater could comfortably hold 4,000. The mansion was the former summer home of the early 20th century plumbing magnate, Richard T. Crane, Jr. The popular folk group, the Kingston Trio, was scheduled to perform on August 4th and 5th. According to Hanley, an event like this was another opportunity to prove himself to Wein as a skilled sound engineer. Arriving at dawn on Friday, August 4th, 1961, the Hanley and Robinson brothers set up a sound system at the base of the sloping lawn overlooking the bay. Here's that image. These men at the Voice of the Theater speakers, I mean, they're well over several hundred pounds, Bill?
About 500.
500 pounds. That's pretty, it's like refrigerator, right? By now, Hanley realized that raising his speakers high in the air provided better results. In order to achieve this, he used construction-grade scaffolding, as you can see here, with wooden planks resting on metal poles. Construction workers who build, repair, or clean buildings commonly use this type of structure. This was sort of an innovation at the time. However, Hanley's deployment of scaffolding in music production may be a first. Once erected, the structure was purposefully elevated slightly higher than it needed to be, so a block and tackle could be affixed to a board across the top. The block and tackle mechanism consisted of ropes and one or more pulley blocks. The challenge was getting the speakers high enough without the scaffolding tipping over. Once the speaker box was strapped in, Hanley and his crew pulled and hoisted the 1,300-pound speakers to the top. Wooden planks were then placed under the dangling speaker across the midsection of the scaffolding. Once in place, the speaker was then precariously lowered onto the resting planks. There were concerns about the structure's safety, but according to Phil, it was because no one had ever seen speakers on scaffolding before. I recall going up in a rented truck with the scaffolding and sound equipment. The speakers were miserable to get up. They were very bulky and very heavy. It took 4 or 5 people to get them up onto the scaffolding. Raising speakers up in the air like this was something new. The equipment for the event consisted of 2 Altec 210 speaker cabinets, 2 Macintosh 275 power amplifiers, 2 105 multi-cell horns, and 2 RCA BN6 mixers. Terry Hanley was preparing the stage area and other equipment setup. According to Terry, "I remember preparing for the Kingston Trio. It was blazing hot. After getting the speakers up on scaffolding, I began setting up mixers and the microphones. I had a pretty good ear, so Bill asked me to mix for the event. I recall George Wein testing us for future gigs." In 1961, the concert series was a huge success. The crowds was 6,000 to 7,000 pouring in the area. The Kingston Trio alone brought in 3,500 attendees and boasted the largest crowd in history on the grounds up until that time. Coincidentally, the group broke up a week later, canceling a performance on Cape Cod. According to those who were in attendance on that hot August weekend in 1961, the quality of Hanley's sound system was impeccable. Here's Bill and Terry outside of their trailer in 1964, I believe. Maybe it was at Newport, the drugs. Terry was 9 years younger. Here's a Boston Globe photo of Bill working on, looks like an amplifier. Here's a mobile home that was basically modified, or often then they would use radio, these would be used for radio transmissions, and Bill bought one of these and modified it for his studio at Newport. This looks like Festival Field at Newport. This is a shot of Newport Folk. Notice the plastic over the mixers here. I think that's Pete Seeger up there on stage. You notice Bill's voice of the theater speakers to the left on scaffold. Here's a wonderful picture of Bill. I think Bill wore different attire. You know, I noticed in pictures for Newport Jazz, you were often in a shirt and a tie and a jacket. And Newport Folk a little bit more laid back, but this is Barbra Streisand, a very young Barbra Streisand. And this is the inauguration of Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. This came out after the inauguration. This was a Shure microphone newsletter, and they were boasting how Shure microphones were used at the event. However, they took most of the credit and barely mentioned Hanley Sound. But up until that point, they were using another vendor for microphones, and when Bill brought in Shure microphones, it really changed. It was a game changer. The story of this is quite amazing. Hopefully you can read about it. Here's the inauguration of this wintry January day. Here's the remains. So I'm gonna toggle to that page, so bear with me. So sound at baseball stadiums, I mean, the Beatles' story is sort of known, wasn't very good for many reasons. But we didn't have the big sort of arena concert sheds that are built for these sort of things like we do now. So often, you know, for shows, you would go, to put it into perspective, if you went to a concert, let's say in the mid-60s, let's say at a basketball arena or you know, a gymnasium, you would have typically one microphone, one amplifier, a speaker, a very modest setup. Bill what Bill does is he sort of magnifies this. He builds systems of sound. He has multiple microphones, multiple amplifiers for more power, big speakers, voice of the theater speakers, which are used in movie theaters that sat behind perforated screens, pushing sound out into the audience. Theaters were closing, television was coming in, so they were liquidating a lot of these things. So Bill was so smart in buying this stuff up and using it for, I mean, this is the foundation of not just rock and roll, but just for concert sound in general. Everything you go to when you see a concert today is, those ideas are founded on these innovations because it didn't exist. So the Remains were, there are a few groups in Bill's history, or the history of Hanley Sound, that were sort of major. The Remains were one of them because they really created a bridge. They didn't just introduce Bill to the Beatles, but you know, Bill was still learning about what was needed to provide quality sound. You know, other vocal groups like the Chambers Brothers, who couldn't hear themselves until Bill Hanley came into the picture. The Cowsills say the same exact thing. There's a pattern that's happening with the type of technology that's being used and then what Bill is introducing. So these are transformative events. It's not just you know, oh, I can hear better now. These are major technological innovations and transformations in this era of technology and music and sound. So it's very, very distinct. This is different. In 1966, the hysteria of Beatlemania was still evident across the United States, but slightly waning. Even so, sound was still an issue. Pockets of fans remained hungry to see the four boys from Liverpool, England, perform live. Tony Bramwell reflects on the group's reluctance to tour in the United States in 1966. Despite saying that they would never go abroad again, another American tour had been booked for August 1966. The Beatles were bored and restless, and they said they wished they didn't have to go. Famously, the Beatles, you know, they stopped touring because they couldn't hear themselves, right? This is an issue. The Beatles had become prisoners of their own fame, as witnessed firsthand by members of the Remains, Barry and the Remains. Barry Tashian observes, it appeared that they had entered a dangerous position. For a while, Beatlemania was at its peak. They had ignited the flames of controversy and were seen by many in the US as problematic. In March of that year, during an interview in the UK, John Lennon claimed that the Beatles had become more popular than Jesus Christ. By the time the group finished the rest of the US tour that summer, tempers flared within Christian communities over that controversial statement. The entire tour covered 14 US cities in August 1966. On some occasions, the band had 2 performances per booking, one mid-afternoon and another at early evening. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. The Remains, Barry and the Remains, were an opening band for the Beatles on this tour. So this is the relevance of the Remains. Because of Bill's relationship with the Remains at these smaller college venues around Boston, they're a Boston band. Once they receive this slot performing in front of the Beatles, Bill sort of naturally realizes this opportunity, and I'm going to get into that story of how he sort of got this relationship with the Beatles. Anyway, the entire tour covered 14 US cities in August of '66. Some occasions, the band had 2 performances per booking. They were stacked, one mid-afternoon and another early evening. This made 19 performances in total. Barry Tashian describes the tour as some of the most memorable days of his life. It began on August 12th at the International Amphitheater in Chicago and ended August 29th at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Hanley provided sound reinforcement for several of these performances. The Remains were slated to open in Chicago, where the British group had played prior in 1964. Nervously, the Boston band played 2 shows, one at 3 p.m. and another at 7:30, in front of more than 13,000 frenetic audience members. Both bands intended to use their own equipment and expected to play through the sound system available at the amphitheater. This was quite common. If a band played a venue, they would use what was available to them, and public address was the only thing available, especially at a stadium where they're calling baseball games, and you know, a place like Madison Square Garden calling boxing matches and things like that. It was just substandard public address. And of course, this here was before any knowledge that Hanley Sound was to accompany them on that tour. So Hanley had wanted to tour with the Beatles since 1964, and now he had a chance. He trucked his sound equipment from Medford across the country to Chicago to see what would happen. He showed up unexpectedly, as some of the Remains recall. According to keyboardist Bill Briggs of the Remains, all of a sudden Bill shows up with his trailer truck and unannounced and begins setting up his equipment. I don't think the Beatles knew, and when they saw it, they said, "What's this? What's this?" Sorry, I had to do that. It's unknown to the Boston band how Hanley arranged to provide sound reinforcement in Chicago. A business decision like this would have been left to the group to discuss. So this is incredible because there's no deal, no contract, nobody knows how Bill got there, but Bill knew this is like the Beatles not only need my sound equipment, they're in need of it because they can't hear themselves, but this is the biggest band in the world. You know, if I don't go there and try and put myself in my savvy with sound in front of them, they're never going to know. So what do? You just load up the truck. Who knows if you're getting paid or not? You're heading out to Chicago. Remains bassist Vern Miller recalls, "I don't have any knowledge of the Remains contacting Hanley in advance. I don't remember that conversation. The impression I got was that it was presented as a gift to the band. With no evidence of a deal being struck or a contract signed between the band and sound company, the ambitious sound engineer most likely didn't ask for any money up front. According to Briggs, Bill Briggs, the keyboardist, it is quite possible that since the sound was known to be so bad in Chicago, that our manager, John Kane, contacted Bill on the side without the Beatles knowing about it. Hanley's intuition and impulse to come to Chicago was on target, since the quality of sound at the amphitheater was notoriously inadequate. Tashian, who kept a detailed journal regarding the experience, recalls, Hanley pulled his truck into the amphitheater, unloaded and set up their state-of-the-art sound equipment right beside the in-house PA system. What a joke. The in-house stuff was so archaic next to Bill's powerful amps, good mics, and all-tech voice of the theater speakers. When the time came for a sound check, there was a squabble between the union, Beatles manager Brian Epstein and Remains manager John Kane. When the union realized the band was using the house system, they were upset. Tashian recalls, they told us we had to use the house system, which was ancient. It was pretty bad compared to Bill's equipment. Vern Miller remembers the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, turns to our manager and says, I see our sound system is here. Kane recognized Hanley and says to Brian, no, that's not your sound system, it's ours. So Epstein realizes that this is better. You know, we want this for the Beatles, and of course they were in need of a good sound system. They were desperate. As clear as day, Epstein could hear the difference in quality of Hanley's sound system compared to the house PA. According to Tashian, Brian looked at two sound systems and decided that the Beatles should go with our system, adding it was the Hanley sound system, our sound system, that the Beatles used that night. Hanley anticipated that providing sound for the raucously loud audiences would be a challenge. Judith Sims, writer for the Teen Set magazine, was sitting behind the stage during this performance. Sims detailed the audible chaos that ensued during the Beatles show, claiming the roar was deafening and that her ears were ringing. She continues observing the difficulty for the band. It's a wonder the Beatles can see or hear at all after going through that so often. Even though there were challenges, the Hanley sound system impressed Epstein. He invited the company for additional dates during the eastern and midwestern portions of the tour. Tashian remembers, I told Hanley we had no budget to pay him. We could only pay a roadie or two to help the Beatles road manager, Mal Evans. Bill said, I don't care, I'm going to go out anyway. If it was fate that landed the Remains on that tour, then it was the quality sound that gave Hanley his chance. So this is a pivotal moment in the history of Hanley's sound. This is historic. And of course, this is the final tour of the Beatles. Can someone tell me the time? Thank you. Right. Quickly, so here's what I believe is Shea Stadium, and this is a funny little thing here. So Bill Briggs, the keyboardist, Bill's on tour with the Beatles, and they're playing multiple dates, of course, and it says here, Bill, the sound engineer, was both focused and overwhelmed during these concerts. Known to be friendly and outgoing, Hanley was sort of a geeky sort of guy, often referred to as the mad scientist of sound. Wearing a white collared shirt buttoned all the way to the neck, he looked the part. As the tips of his wavy hair danced in the ball-filled wind, he tweaked the dials of his sound machine into overdrive. The mercury rectifier tubes within the 4 RCA 600W battleship amplifiers intensified, glowing bluish purple. According to Hanley, he pushed the military-grade equipment to the limit. He says they weighed 200 or 300 pounds, and didn't have great frequency response. You had to drive the inputs with 100 watts, but it wasn't enough. Bill Briggs recalls Hanley's system as science fiction then. He says, there was Bill behind these huge glowing tubes, twisting dials. He made me think of the sounds of electricity as they were generated in Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. He was a mad scientist. I had never seen anything like this before. He had a big smile on his face with his headphones on. Pretty incredible stuff. There's Judy Bernstein. She was the manager at Hanley Sound and a legend in her own right. I mean, especially for women in the music industry then. She worked at Premier Talent and brought a lot of contacts to Hanley Sound. Really, just a huge, huge contribution to the music industry. We miss Judy. And here's Hanley Sound. So this is what it looked like. This is the only known photo I've ever seen. I'd love to. I wish there was some other interior shots, but this is Hanley Sound here in 1969. And this is the Fillmore East. So Bill, by the mid-60s, Hanley Sound is now venturing into New York City. And here's Bill right below, I would say in the basement of Fillmore East, recording these shows. And you can hear these shows on Wolfgang's Vault. And Bill Graham was notorious, if anybody, some of you who don't know who Bill Graham was, just sort of an impresario of rock and roll exhibition. He's created so many innovations and opportunities for bands and production people. And the Fillmore East, especially the Fillmore East, sort of was a launching pad into larger arena rock type situations. Proper theater, best practices in theater, like lighting and sound and just overall production. Graham is the sort of source of that for rock and roll, most definitely. And of course, recording. And of course, Bill Hanley sound system there. So here's an ad for Hanley Sound, which is really, really cool to look at. The sound of the Fillmore. This is an advertisement in the Village Voice. And this is interior of the Fillmore East. This is an interesting photo. So this is the Fillmore East, and if you go to a concert now, boy, you spend $4,000 and you get to watch TV for the whole night at a concert, right? So projection television at concerts certainly didn't exist at this time, but there were elements or traces of this technology being used and deployed. And this was Bill bringing into the light show a projector that basically was capturing Janis Joplin performing live with an actual image behind her. So, whether it's art or not, it is a major innovation in just the visualization for those who are sitting in the way back, so you can actually see up close. And these developments kept going on and on and on. Interesting stuff. So this is the Miami Pop Festival. This is a tractor trailer here. I don't know which one. There were names for these tractor trailers. Does that say Gene on the front of it? Anyway, it's a beautiful photo. And so the rise of the festival. So this is another pivotal moment in the business of music. It's not quite an industry yet, where rock and roll is getting bigger. The rise of superstars like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix out of the Monterey Pop Festival. We're starting to see festival films, and these acts are getting bigger. They're demanding more money. They don't want to play smaller venues like the Fillmore East for, in front of 2,000 people for 5 nights for 10 grand. Now they can play at Madison Square Garden in front of 20,000 and get $50,000 or 75. And the festivals sort of came out of that, just bigger. Of course, it was a major cultural movement, the festivals, Woodstock and other things. These were opportunities for a counterculture to unify and to seek utopia and denounce the conservative views of government and parents and all that. They were gathering places, right? But it was also, for an developing industry, a way for promoters to make more money, for bands to make more money, to play on these larger stages in front of larger audiences. And this is where we start to see Bill being known as the father of festival sound. By this time, let's say 1968, he now has the largest, he's working at Newport, he has the largest amount of equipment than anybody in the business. I mean, there's hardly anybody that has as much equipment and is able to handle as much with regard to concerts simultaneously, even tours at this time. So he's sort of dominating this business. I wouldn't even call it a monopoly, it wasn't even that yet. There are very few people in the country at this point that could handle the rise of popular music in this way. Festivals were huge. In 1969 alone, there were probably well over 75 festivals in the US, maybe even more of smaller capacity. And of course, what do? You buy a tractor trailer and you load it up with equipment, and now you're on the road, right?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is that Michael's Festival or Mel's Festival?
Yeah, that's Mel's Festival. That's the second Miami Pop Festival. Yeah, yep. This is a Dilt's photo. This is the second festival. Yep, there were 2. They get confused.
Stan Goldstein was involved.
Stan Goldstein was involved. Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Yep. And this is the seeds of Woodstock were planted here as it relates to Bill, right? So you know that, Nick. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And here we are at Woodstock. So this is, Bill is most known for Woodstock. Naturally so. I mean, it's the epochal event of a generation. It has so many ways to frame the Woodstock story. So much has been written about it. Its impact on culture, society, politics. It's global now. It's been marinating for over 50 years, and rightfully so. People know about Woodstock, whether they're at the event or not. They saw the film moved them, and of course, the power of Woodstock lives on. We just recently lost Michael Lang, so sad. But Bill was the guy for Woodstock. There was nobody else that could have handled it. Some people say Owsley Stanley from the Grateful Dead, but I just look at that on paper, and I highly doubt that he could have handled the capacity. But like Bill always says, we were only expecting 150,000. They get over 400,000 people at Woodstock. Pretty incredible stuff. And I think Bill's on stage here with Santana. There's some famous shots by Baron Wolman with Bill on stage with Santana. And here's Woodstock. Here you notice Bill's speakers, upper and lower level. And there's Nick Burns, who I was hoping would show up tonight, but that's a great photo. Look at that. 75 feet out into stage left on scaffolding. What a vulnerable little area there. This image is very famous. I mean, this goes around a lot. People see this photo a lot by David Marks. There's Scott Holden, who was destined to live under the stage for 3 days at Woodstock to make sure that the amplifiers stayed cool and nothing went into overdrive. Poor guy. Here's Hanley Sound, Medford, Mass, and this is one of the trailers. You notice the horns out in front. at Woodstock. This is probably a Sunday. You could always tell what day it is at Woodstock based on what was left on the ground or how the terrain looked. There's Harold Cohen, who was one of Hanley's lead engineers. This is in the electronics where they would work the workbench at Hanley Snow. Here's David Marks. This is a black and white photo, but that is a yellow tractor trailer, often referred to as the Yellowbird. And that one on many famous tours. This is Hanley sound system that went to South Africa, as I mentioned before. David Marks, who, out of all the, I mean, there are a lot of, I don't want to use the word gypsy, but it's more like a very transient business. You know, young people showing, it's almost like the circus. You know, I'm going to join the circus, I'm going to join Hanley Sound, and you walk in and you're on, I mean, I can't tell you many stories of past crew members that said, you know, I packed a suitcase and I came back, you know, 5 years later, you know, and I went on all these amazing journeys and tours with Hanley Sound. And David Marks, South Africa, was on holiday in the U.S. He wrote a song that 3 Jacks and a Jill made. Master Jack, and he had some money from that, and he ended up in Newport, and then found a job with Bill from his connections at Newport, and then for a year, he brought along a camera and a journal, and took a lot of photos, and thank God for that, because we would really have not much to look at if it wasn't for David Marks. He's just, in his own right, he is a folk legend and a troubadour for
Anti-apartheid.
for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa.
They couldn't have concerts that collected money in private places. They had to go to farms and no charge.
That's right, yeah. So the Woodstock sounds, Bill loans the Woodstock sound system to David Marks. It goes to South Africa for like 10 years, and there David Marks sets up these free concerts, these free people concerts for integrated audiences where you couldn't do that before. And he's a legend. So the Woodstock vibe sort of lives on, it continues on, and that's a whole other history in South Africa that Hanley is involved in, and of course through David Marks, just a wonderful human being. And here's the Atlanta Pop Festival. So the festivals are getting bigger, post-Woodstock fear. People, you know, conservative, small town America, conservative communities are getting afraid of the festivals. As I mentioned before in my summary, you know, people didn't want this sort of thing in their backyard, and that affected Bill's business. This is this is Madison Square Garden. It might have been the Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones.
Yep, Rolling Stones. And there's Bill setting up this hula hoop, famous Hanley hula hoop at Madison Square Garden. What a great photo.
Joan Baez.
Joan Baez. It's theater in the round, right? Music in the round, yeah. And there's West Palm Beach Pop. There's an overhead of the West Palm Beach Pop Festival. Here's some promo material.
He was part of the...
So we get into the demonstrations. Campbell here, Bill? Yeah, he was part of the...
That was part of the hog farmers.
He was a hog farmer, that's correct, yeah, absolutely. So here's an anti-war demonstration. Bill does this for many years. These stories are incredible. What Bill put himself through and faced these were dangerous situations, and there were thousands and thousands, bigger than some of the festivals that even occurred. But quality sound, intelligible sound was needed so people could hear. So by 1971 or 2, Bill's, you know, showing up, and someone told me that Bill was almost, so he would, if you looked on a venue, you would see Sound by Hanley. He was part of the listing of the bands. It was like Jefferson Airplane, Canned Heat, Sound by Hanley. You don't see that too often today. So he's becoming quite famous and known for what he's doing, these innovations. He's becoming sort of a popular figure. And this is an Esquire magazine. And this is Bill and his wife Rhoda Rosenberg at Philadelphia Folk Festival. I don't think they were married. Yeah, I think they just met there. And this is some blueprints for Bill's Magic Stage. As I mentioned before, Bill, towards the mid to late 70s, is focusing more on staging.
Those are patent drawings.
These are patent drawings, Bill says. Bill has a patent on this design, this unique design. There's Bill. That's Bill and I, we spent several years down at the Gathering of the Vibes. I was, of course, researching. Bill was just chilling out, interviewing Wavy Gravy. And here's Bill and Terry Hanley, and this plaque was put up in 2013. It's quite large. It's in front of the Dunkin' Donuts. But we were just on WBUR, and the producer lives in Medford. She walked by every day. She's like, oh, that's how they got us on the radio there. There it is. All right, so I'm going to roll into we're going to get into the doc, and I'm watching the time, so just bear with me a minute. Anybody have any questions for Bill? Yes, sir.
Phil, did you actually have to invent some of the tech? Did you actually have to, as you got further and further into audio technology and you were faced with these new challenges, going where no one else had gone before in terms of like the stadium rock concerts and the rock festivals, did you find it necessary to actually improvise to the point of actually inventing some of the technologies that you yourself were using in terms of expanding the capacity of what, because your whole story seems to be about, you know, going beyond what was previously there in order to accomplish what you wanted to do. So I was wondering, are you an inventor as well as a incredible technician?
Well, we tried to, extend everything out to the best quality we could, build our own cabinets, put down 4 drivers in one cabinet, then went to 8 drivers in a cabinet. And we invented the footlight monitors. You see everybody that's down below, and that they're down there so that they face in the back of the microphone, such as projection. It's a solid projection. And with Neil Young and Buffalo Springfield, because they had rented a system, and they had said, well, we can't hear each other. Well, you're not supposed to be hearing each other. We're hearing each other. But they couldn't stay together in time, so I said, well, I can fix that, and they fixed it. And that became the standard of the industry.
Did you copyright these things? I mean,
Yeah, how could you copyright it? It's a speaker. It was from Atwater Kent days, from old radio days, and then you take steps and you try this and try that. But we were really the people that tried to make it high quality involvement with what was going on the stage. People hear and understand what was being said. I spent a lot of time in the garden, and it was a horror show.
Oh, yes.
And nobody was in the business of trying to make these things work as a standard thing. And that you should hear and understand what's being said. Not, oh yeah, so everything's fine. That's basically what we did. We were the first people to do that. Nobody, people who had public address systems. My guy that I studied was Jack Boston, and he had a 37 Pontiac with 16 loudspeakers, re-entrant trumpets on top of his car, and he would drive around the fairgrounds. But it wasn't very high fidelity, and it was a paging system in effect. And we were the first people who kept advancing that and working as sound levels picked up further and further. We kept getting more gear and trying to have people care about that. Nobody was doing it. It was strictly churches, factories, small nightclubs. The Gardens had a system, but it was a horror show, and people weren't into making it happen well audio-wise.
Those buildings were not built, like the Boston Garden. They were not built for music. They were not acoustically.
Correct. It took a long time to get them to do that, but we kept pushing. and trying to get them to do it. It was a real uphill climb because the promoters didn't want to pay for a good sound system for an event and people couldn't hear and understand. They would just, you know, pay your money and oh, there it goes, and goodbye. So we were invented that. How do you patent that? I wasn't making equipment. I was developing a marketplace that it had, you know, made a marketplace fixing in rooms that existed so that you could hear this and work on the acoustics and get the speakers in the right place and get them doing all that stuff. Which the local sound company, you know, DeNambro and a bunch of people that did it in Boston who did churches and nightclubs, and that's it. Nobody seemed to care, except me.
Any other questions?
When did equalizers become popular?
Longevin made a graphic equalizer that was octave set up, and then they went to it. I saw one with the JBL had made a third of an octave filter set, and I found that very useful. There was a guy that did an interesting thing at Bell Laboratories who made a system that you whistle into 1,000 and you would change it 5 cycles lower so that it wouldn't go into feedback, because feedback is when the sound system hears, or the microphone hears what's going on in the room, and it runs in a circle, and it's an oscillator. It just makes a tone. So that was the first one I saw, a fancy one, other than simple tone control. Operator, I can't think of the name of the company, had a unit that had tone controls for a record player and for speech, which is the first one I saw. And I advanced on those things, and when I saw that other stuff, I could use that to make things work well and not go into feedback so early.
Any other questions?
Did you get a chance to enjoy any of the performances you did sound for? I mean, did you get a chance to actually listen?
Yeah,
I mean, not technically.
not really. My job was for you people in the audience. That was my mission, was to have convey what was going on the stage out to the listening ears. And that's who I was working for you guys. One of the pictures that I had, that was fantasies I had, was after watching the horrors of Hitler's extreme insanity, was that I fantasized that people, if they could hear and understand,
Like Nuremberg.
what? And that was part of the modus operandi.
As far as the Beatles are concerned, it always amazed me that they could sing those beautiful harmonies amongst all the thousands of screaming teenagers and without having a monitor system, without hearing themselves. Did they have a monitor system on that last tour? And did you have anything to do with developing monitor systems? They start the side stage and move
That
to
was
the
the only
front?
thing that was used with side stage or side phase.
The only thing that was used was side fill speakers for monitoring. And that's when the microphone hears the sound from the speaker, and then you get a whistle feedback. That's what I figured out with when Neil Young complained like hell with the Buffalo Springfield, that they couldn't hear each other. Well, I said, well, the best way to do that is this way. And I took my cabinets, those pieces put together, and put it down and put the angle up, and then basically tried it into the back so it reject everything coming from the back pipe. Here I am right there talking the same level. So if you feed that, that's why you see the speakers around them.
So the Buffalo Springfield were in effect the first band to use those front.
Right, they came with a complaint. Up until that time, you kept them way out to the side so that they didn't pick up much energy to go into feedback.
That had to be what, 67, something like that?
I don't know what date it was, but
Sounds right.
until something like that. But that's how the idea came to mind.
Brilliant! Brilliant!
Thanks. We try harder. Believe us.
Any other
Or
questions?
hurts.
Any questions? Gentlemen, has a question.
Bill, on the fire that was next door to your place when your basement got flooded,
Yep.
were you able to save any of the film that was down there, or was it ruined by the water? And
You know, recording systems are different. They usually go to the people that pay to have it done. George Wing was stashing it and said it was going to the Voice of America, so I didn't charge for them other than the tape, and then he would take it. Now sold them to the guy that got all that old material. And I was never into that was being done by record recording companies. My mission was for you, the audience, and to try to make it happen well. It's a funny story. Just a while ago, there was some people who mentioned the Beatles sound system at Shea Stadium. Well, you couldn't hear yourself think down near the stage. But someone said, they said, well, I could hear good. What? I couldn't hear very well. Come to find out that they were listening up at the top of the balcony. So all my speakers were pointed up there. So they heard the sound system. But the girls were making so much noise you couldn't hear yourself think. Screaming at the top of their lungs. I mean, to the point of jumping off the balcony and breaking their legs and whatever craziness was going on. So
do you still have the Hammond B3? That's,
I had one of those too, but I managed to lose that.
you lost that too, okay. Steve's down in Florida, he worked, he asked me that, so.
So that's basically what we were doing and trying to have that happen well. Nobody, up until that time, it was, you know, it was the radio operators and the sound system, and that was it. They didn't care. As long as they got it over the airwaves, that was their responsibility.
We got time for one more? All right, so two more. He's behind you, Bill.
Who's,
The technology of the industry that you created is advanced so far. What are your thoughts on all the new equipment, digital amplifiers and programmable mixers and steerable line arrays and all that stuff?
it's great stuff. Great, it's a tool to bring that information out. And we use column effect, which I had first on an aircraft carrier that I put a sound system on down in Newport. And if you make an array big enough, so you get a long, what's called a line array. As you make the array longer, the sound energy gets captured in that way. And if you do it in both axes, you're now controlling the sound, which is what you can do, you know, with it's basically the same thing. And I think it's fantastic. And it gets to be, you know, then the musicians design their music around being able to do this better. And that's basically what it is, and making sure that you get them into the microphone. Because if you don't get in the microphone, you're shit out of luck. And my ass is grass. Okay? To put it simply.
I think the gentleman had a question. We'll wrap it up.
Quick question, I was just curious.
Closer to the microphone.
Sorry, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Around about Woodstock time, you see the speaker setups and everything else, but how many channels of audio were you mixing at that point?
18 and 19.
Oh, okay. So it was
It was
already,
pretty unsophisticated at the time. I was told a much smaller crowd was going to be there.
All of a sudden, we had this, national audience. And so what I did was I took the crossovers out of the system for the low frequency end and run full range and maxed everything out with limiters and compressors to get every bit drop of energy I could get out into audio information. And that's what I thought about, and managed to keep going from one end to the other to make sure the water didn't get into amplifiers and cause troubles, and just making sure that everything was running. That's all I thought about. No music, no love of it, other than Janice and Richie Havens and what's his name with his guitar?
Jimi Hendrix.
Jimi Hendrix, right. Someone else had a question.
We're running out of time, but we have one more, maybe one more?
Bill, first of all, I want to congratulate you. You're just the pride of Medford and everyone else that knows and loves you. I am amazed. I am amazed. And you are the epitome of what it is to be a self-made innovator. It's amazing what you've done. I'm so impressed by a person like you with that humility and that ability and your confidence and your perseverance. Unbelievable.
Thanks.
You really are. And I wanted to also ask you why you never thought about going into the actual hearing aid business to hear everybody else that's had $7,000 hearing aids. Did you ever think about that?
Well, that's almost a one to very small group.
That's to be you.
I was in the garden with
I know, but
12,000 people.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people now, there's probably many people in the garden that could use you for their hearing aid.
It's a different business.
I know, but you can do it. Bill, I know you can do it. Congratulations. You make it very proud. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Nothing else? Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really happy holidays. Love you all. Really appreciate it. If you're interested, we have some books and photo op with Bill, of course. Safe travels. Thank you so much.
Let's also motion up here, John. Let's go. Hustle, hustle. Very nice meeting you. Thank you. Think you still live in America? Hey, Bill, would you sign this?
I'm still working on it. Yeah, I mean, this is the perfect venue for it. Libraries, very buildings
I heard the story in NPR a couple weeks ago. I've been catching the car just like 6
that was so amazing. That was so amazing.
No, I'm done. I'm just the same as you then.
Just looking to get out. I think they're filming, so let's stay out of the way.
Years ago, you spoke out Lemonster. I bought a copy of it.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, that too, yeah. So, first of all, thank you. And I have, as I mentioned,
A number of years ago, I knew the co-founder of Troy, not Dr. Gold.
He taught me.
Yeah, so I don't know if they... Right, except that I remember they had done like some system for Saudi Arabia at the college. So they were doing custody for setup. Slightly different than what you're doing.
yeah, I'll say this joke for the show.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It's amazing. We're hoping this is back, but it's 4:30 sales.
I saw the Facebook and I was like, social media was interesting, and then it reminded me it's not
Really? 10 years. Oh, so glad we get this. I have to buy these for the whole nice camera.
brand new. I'm happy I waited.
Yeah.
I want to say goodnight.
You'll probably contest some of my people research. That's why I wrote it.
9:03, the witching hour.
How do I pay you? Can I pay you with cash?
Cash is best.
Oh, yeah.
Bill signed
Yeah, it's already signed by Bill. Oh, if you want him to write something else. Thank you, Ben. Okay, 40. Yeah. 40. Thank you. Thanks, brother. Tell me what you think about those Beatle chapters, because I know you're going to go straight to that. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the support, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. He's one of my favorite people.
I know. I know he is.
I get lost in all the equipment.
I know you do.
So I'm going to go through and read it.
Well, the one thing that's been contested in there is who provided sound for the Beatles at Shade 65. No one knows.
One thing I didn't tell you is that I figured out the speakers that were used, the brand model, they actually own a pair now.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Joe.
Somewhere it said it was the engineer that did the, actually maybe it was you that said that
It's only
the film guy that was the
makes sense
engineer.
that it was the people who recorded the show, because those Bob Fine and another dude, because they were listed in the AES. Miss Lendler, how are you?
I'm fine, but those pictures of the house before I had it painted.
It's architectural integrity. It's the authentic. No one knows, but you know something?
You have got to go back and take pictures.
I don't want it. I want it to look as old and original as possible. Polish it up in Photoshop.
Do you still have any books left?
Yes, I got this one right here.
I'll still get a book.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, well, I do wish that you would get the pictures of the house, but yeah, then I shoot.
I can go back and shoot it.
Yes, please do.
Do you want to talk around? Go this way.
It's a beautiful house.
No, I said,
Oh.
I just wanted to let you know.
How's life? How you been?
Life's been good.
Good.
What about for you?
Good.
You all up in the world now?
I don't think I don't know if I've been going up in the world, but I'm living, I'm alive, and I'm appreciative of that. You know?
So I don't need to, and Bill signed it too?
Yep.
He signed my good stuff.